When I was younger, I could rarely sit through a movie and actually care. My attention span just couldn't handle 2 hours of a movie. But I've always been into horror and mostly video games, but some movies as well. Now I'm older and wiser, and I'm taking the time out to appreciate some of the best horror films ever made, and maybe some of the worst. I'm Rob from the Masters of Nonsense, and I am embarrassed by my own movie collection. I used to go to Best Buy when I was younger and pick out a DVD to bring home. But in hindsight, they were not exactly movies you would want to show off. In fact, the first two DVDs I remember buying were Office Space, which is a great movie, and Grumpier Old Men, yes, the sequel to Grumpy Old Men. And my collection spiraled from there. Here we are in the age of streaming, which makes it a lot easier to find the movies that you want to watch, but the services are getting more expensive and there are way too many of them anyway. Now it's time for me to take a step back and start building out my own horror library that I can be proud of, and not rely on streaming anymore. Which brings us to Reanimator. Is this movie worth owning? Tale of the Tape. Reanimator, released in 1985 and derived from H.P. Lovecraft's Herbert West Reanimator. This movie takes inspiration from that short story and turns things on its severed heads. What's the gimmick? The official logline of the film is, after an odd new medical student arrives on campus, a dedicated local and his girlfriend become involved in bizarre experiments centering around the reanimation of dead tissue. Basically zombies. I'm already on board with this. Mr. West creates a reanimation juice. Dan Kane, who is his roommate and a nurse that's practicing here, can't keep people alive for some reason. But he's engaged to Dean's daughter, Megan, and Dr. Hill is the leading doctor or scientist who specializes on the brain in this facility.
3 minutes and we're out of here.
Like I mentioned before, I have a short attention span. With little time to spare, I make my initial judgment on a movie based on the first 3 minutes of the film. And 3 minutes into Reanimator, I wasn't sold. Sure, there was eyeballs bursting out of somebody's head because Mr. West's experiment has gone wrong, but the acting was a little too over the top for me. I thought this was going to be hokey, and that probably within the span of this movie I would forget that I'm actually watching it until the credits rolled. Felt very sea-level and sci-fi for me. I'm not a big sci-fi person, and the cast just felt generic. Of course, we've only seen a couple of people at this moment. And of course, I was terribly wrong. Mark out moment. Once we finally got into the story, which honestly didn't take long, I got hooked. 86 minutes long, which is the absolute perfect length for me in general, and this movie wasted little time. The moment I popped for this movie was when Herbert West's successful experiment with Rufus the cat, who we're not quite sure exactly how he died, he gets reanimated with the green goo and then proceeds to try to kill Mr. West. The only way to stop Rufus, of course, is to throw him as hard as possible against the wall. And curiosity reanimates the cat because after this, of course, Mr. West wants to go ahead and shoot him up with some goo again, and the cat is ready to go for round 2, even with the broken back. This is really where things pick up and experiments go wrong or right from here on out. Herbert West ends up in Dr. Hill's class and they challenge brain theories against each other. Any corpses that we find along the way end up reanimated and going into a primal fit of rage, likely due to the fact that they're being brought back into miserable existence and wanting to destroy anything in their path. Dr. Hill takes offense to all the things that are happening, and of course wants to steal the reanimation serum from Mr. West and claim it as his own. Of course, this leads to Herbert West picking off Dr. Hill's head with a shovel, and what else do you do with a corpse in this movie? Juice them up. The blown spot. There's one part of this film that felt a little off to me and didn't feel like it was necessary, although I can see why it was in here. We learned that Dr. Hill is obsessed with the dean's daughter, and he goes on to do some pretty creepy, shocking, and memorable things that I honestly didn't feel were necessary for the overall story of this movie. The dude already seemed crazy, but I don't think he needed to be an everyday creeper on top of it. He just needed to be a super brain who was let loose. The big leg, brother. When we get to the end of this movie, Dr. Hill was about to have his way with Meg. That's the scene I was talking about prior. Herbert West and Dan Kane come in for the save, and Dr. Hill had already executed his major plan of lobotomizing corpses in the morgue and using his own brain to control them and have them go to attack and try to kill them. There is a lot that happens in this last part of this movie, and I honestly don't want to spoil anything else. I might spoil one thing more from here, but this is quality horror, and you have to check it out. Break it down. Now let's break out this movie and see, does it have what it takes to be part of the Masters collection? Theme music. Heavily inspired by Psycho, but different enough to be iconic. The booking. The cast was superb. Just about everybody was perfectly cast in their roles, and the performances were memorable, and they really did feel like they were part of this insane story. I give them a big thumbs up on this. The storyline was just about there. There's, of course, a little hiccup here or there, but at the end of the day, this is a great story and very well executed. The biggest pop, and something that I didn't mention earlier, but I have to say because of creativity, intestines bursting through a mind-controlled corpse trying to strangle somebody definitely wins favors for me when it comes to horror. Going home. So now, is this movie worth going home with me, or should it go down in the fiery depths with streaming? This is a movie I absolutely loved on my first viewing. Although, I don't know how often I would revisit it. Everything that happens in this movie is memorable, and it really did leave a lasting impression on me and made me really appreciate this movie as a classic. But I worry that watching it over and over would spoil it for me. So I don't see myself revisiting it often. I have very little desire to rewatch it, but I want that memory to stay alive with me. So I watched this on Shudder, but it's also on AMC Plus, Tubi, Canopy, Dark Matter, Arrow. I've honestly never heard of some of these, and that means that most of these might not exist in 5 years. So what happens to this movie when those services end up collapsing? According to Amazon, the Blu-ray copy of the movie was bought over 100 times in the last month alone, which makes me think that 100 people plus are just like me and realize that this movie is worth owning. Reanimator is a classic and will soon be part of the Masters of Nonsense horror collection. Let's call for the bell because now we have our decision. This movie takes an official spot on the Masters of Nonsense movie shelf. Are you thinking about getting this movie now? Do you think the decision should be overturned? Let us know by joining the discussion on our Threads page and all of our social media available on this screen. Like, subscribe, repeat. Always repeat.